Warrior, take a hard look at the scene around the arena of daily life. Because the ones who command real regard aren't necessarily the sweetest faces in the crowd. The ones who shape the conversation aren't merely the noisiest, and the consistent victors aren't always the most academically brilliant. What they possess is a playbook others never studied, an old current running through 5 centuries of strategy, linked to a Florentine advisor whose name is now shorthand for power mechanics. Influence itself isn't poison or panacea. It's a neutral instrument, and its moral color depends on the hands that wield it and the aims they choose. Those who rise understand that psychology moves faster than rational debate, and that presence, perception, and timing bend outcomes more reliably than raw facts. This is less about winning arguments than about shaping frames, less about shouting than about shaping the room, and less about being adored than about being effective. Here's the pact for today. Absorb 9 hard-edged psychological levers that render a person difficult to corner, not because of bluster, but because of control over context and emotion. This isn't fluffy advice. It's a tour through the machinery separating the one who sets the game from the one who gets played by it. Walk out understanding why certain figures seem to magnetize attention, avoid traps, and reliably secure outcomes without open force. Seal it with a mantra that prioritizes effectiveness over approval, power before popularity, and let the algorithm of life register that choice. Most will nod, do nothing, and return to the treadmill of other people's frames. Refuse that fate and step into disciplined application. First lever, the likeness lock. People don't bond to what jars their identity. They flow toward what feels familiar, and similarity begets liking. Mirroring, subtle reflection of speech cadence, posture, word choice, and energy, builds unconscious rapport and signals same tribe, easing resistance before content is even discussed. High performers deploy this without caricature, letting the other person's rhythm set a baseline, then joining it with a slight delay to avoid mimicry that feels mocking. The mind takes comfort in the familiar silhouette. So matched phrasing and tempo lubricate trust better than a dozen credentials tossed on the table. Even the old masters warned, perception is the stage where judgments are formed, long before actions are weighed, so never ignore the optics layer of influence. Similarity foreshadows agreement, and agreement foreshadows access. To execute likeness without losing authenticity, treat matching as empathy in motion, not mimicry as a mask. If someone leans in, follow with a brief pause before leaning in, aligning posture while maintaining naturalness. If their speech is unhurried, let the syllables breathe. Mirror key vocabulary judiciously if awesome or precisely is their anchor word. Use it so their mind hears its own resonance coming back. Track energy levels, amplify enthusiasm when they spark, soften pace when they turn pensive, and reflect concern with tempered seriousness rather than correction. After rapport takes root, lead the tempo upward or downward and watch how the alignment follows, because guidance flows easiest across a bridge the other person believes they built. The best operators make every conversation feel like catching up with a trusted ally, and that effect is engineered, not accidental. Second lever, the rarity rule. Constant availability cheapens perceived worth, while selective access sharpens desire and resets expectations about how time and attention get treated. Scarcity is not cruelty. It's the artful design of boundaries that teach others how to value what is finite. The most coveted goods are limited editions, not endlessly stocked shelves, and the same bias applies to presence and engagement. Classical statecraft reminds us that when warmth and intimidation cannot coexist, safety often tilts toward the latter. The lesson here is to project consequence, not meanness. Strategic distance signals self-respect, which pulls respect in return. Build this edge with practical cadence control. Don't default to instant replies. Set clear windows for deep work and social exchange so that focused attention becomes an event rather than a faucet. Let biography unfold in layers rather than dumping the archive on first contact because mystery exerts a magnetic pull. Vary response times so no one treats the signal as guaranteed on demand, allowing just enough unpredictability to keep engagement attentive rather than entitled. Calibrate so people feel fortunate when they do receive full presence, never abandoned when they don't. The difference is communicated by consistency in tone, even as timing varies. In a world of infinite pings, controlled scarcity is the only alarm clock that still works on human attention. Third lever, emotional primacy. Reason usually comes second, writing elegant footnotes to choices already drafted by feeling. If the goal is guidance without friction, target the effective layer first, then offer logic as a supportive scaffold. The fox-lion duality, outwit traps with cunning, deter predators with presence, captures the blend of emotional calibration and situational boldness required. Build requests around what might be lost rather than what could be gained, because the human brain weights losses more heavily than commensurate gains. Evoke significance by casting people as protagonists in a meaningful arc. Give partial information to invite their mind to complete the story. Show that others have already crossed the bridge and let deadlines inject needed urgency. Curated emotions steer decisions. Logic merely justifies arrival. There's a high road way to do this. Trade commands for curiosity by inviting perspective. What do you make of this approach? So sovereignty remains intact while attention shifts to the path you prefer. Ask directional questions whose answers point toward your destination, then honor their authorship when they articulate the solution, because ownership accelerates follow-through. When disagreement arises, acknowledge the valid piece and bridge to a synthesis that preserves face. There's wisdom there. How do we capture it while also solving X? So tension becomes collaboration. The paradox of influence is that people enjoy being led when the movement feels like self-expression. Fourth lever, informational altitude. Knowledge hoarded thoughtlessly is paranoia. Knowledge shared promiscuously is self-sabotage. The craft is deciding what to gather, when to deploy, and what to withhold. Listen more than speaking, and prompt more than proclaim, because people reveal their maps when invited to narrate them. Track what matters to them, worries, ambitions, constraints, and observe behavior under stress or excitement to learn the patterns that will repeat under pressure. Triangulate stories from multiple vantage points to see the composite picture hidden from single narrators. It isn't secrecy for its own sake. It's treating knowledge as currency to be invested with care. Share strategically. Seed value to open channels, but aim to receive more than is given, so your informational altitude stays above the weather. Timing is often the invisible multiplier. What's trivial on Monday can be decisive on Friday, so revisit whether now is the moment to release a fact or keep it banked. Provide enough clarity to move initiatives forward, never enough ammunition to undermine your position, and prepare for pivotal talks by researching background, goals, recent wins and stumbles. The most accurate map wins the march, and the march that wins becomes the story everyone else must explain. Fifth lever, elevate to ascend. Small minds attempt to rise by cutting others down. Smart operators rise by building platforms. Others are proud to stand on, creating coalitions that compound. When people feel seen, credited, and lifted, they start guarding the hand that helped them, investing their reputation in your trajectory. The caliber of allies is a public mirror of judgment, so curate peer groups and teams that reflect competence and integrity rather than flattery. Statecraft's ageless observation is that leadership quality is measured by the company it keeps, not the slogans it repeats. Make others look formidable, and the reflected light polishes your own armor. Practical scripts upgrade these levers from theory to movement. For likeness, notice your team calls that metric time to value. Let's anchor on that label so we're aligned, then mirror their cadence and pacing on the next point. For scarcity, there are 2 deep dive slots this week. Thursday afternoon is best for a careful walkthrough, signaling finite access and full presence. For emotional primacy, here's the risk if we wait. Competitors lock the channel, so let's secure the lane now and we can optimize after, flipping the frame to loss and urgency. For informational altitude, before we lock scope, what's the hardest part for your ops team lately? Then listen and take quiet notes to tailor the next move. For elevation, Maria's analysis surfaced the key constraint. Let's build on her insight, and then protect the credit trail so the alliance binds. Add 2 accelerators that thread through every lever. First, social proof is a river that wears down resistance. So place visible markers of consensus where they matter. Case counts, respected endorsements, or momentum snapshots that shrink uncertainty. Second, craft deadlines that are meaningful rather than manipulative, tying time pressure to real windows of opportunity or risk so urgency feels like stewardship, not scare tactics. These compress decision time and leverage the human bias toward following the visible path when the clock ticks. Stack them atop scarcity and emotion, and the probability of movement climbs. Commit to the mantra, effectiveness above likability, and watch how boundaries invite respect. Likeness builds trust, emotion steers decisions, information sets altitude, and elevation forges allies. None of this demands cruelty. It demands clarity about incentives, behavior, and the invisible rules of groups. The Florentine lesson was never simple brutality. It was realism about human nature and the balance of appearance, timing, and consequence. Apply these levers with integrity and they become a code for constructing durable wins, not cheap tricks that collapse under scrutiny. Influence is architecture, not noise. Return to the room that once felt intimidating and scan it with new eyes. Every cluster of conversation is a network of incentives. Every confident voice rides on social proof. Every decisive nod hides an emotional trigger that logic later ratifies. Step in with calibrated likeness first. Keep presence scarce and valuable. Frame choices through meaningful stakes. Collect the map before proposing the route. And raise others so the coalition lifts the mission. This is the posture of someone who doesn't chase attention yet finds it arriving on time. It is the stance of the fox and the lion, choosing when to glide and when to roar. The ancient counsel often gets misquoted. But the real edge is synthesis. Be both warm and formidable when possible, and when the world forces a choice, select the stance that preserves the mission without abandoning decency. That balance is not for show. It's the quiet spine behind every negotiation, every alliance, every timely refusal. Influence is a neutral current. The hand determines the direction. Take up the levers, wield them with restraint and precision, and watch the terrain tilt. Strong leaders choose to stand shoulder to shoulder with capable, ambitious minds because surrounding greatness multiplies capability rather than diminishing it. While fragile leaders recruit compliant mediocrity and then puzzle over stagnant outcomes, missed opportunities, and a culture that never stretches to meet its potential. Credit should be passed outward and upward, especially where others can witness it, because public recognition converts into loyalty, pride, and discretionary effort in ways no memo ever can. Whereas criticism belongs behind closed doors, where dignity remains intact and guidance can be absorbed without spectacle or shame. Notice the craftsmanship in others, skill, grit, taste, judgment, or timing, and call it out with precision so the praise lands as real. Everyone carries a private trophy case, and authentic acknowledgement places another plaque inside it. Help doors swing open, share context, nominate for roles, pass along introductions, and translate invisible wins into visible chances. Because reputations for making others thrive attract talent, information, and goodwill at remarkable speed. Reputation as a connector magnetizes exchanges. When nodes are linked that were previously isolated, information begins to flow toward the person who builds the bridge, and those grateful for that bridge come back with news, openings, and trust. Positive associations compound. When someone looks capable in a room because of discreet positioning and timely spotlighting, warmth toward the enabler expands as a durable emotional anchor, and reciprocity, spoken or unspoken, follows along its own timetable. Discernment is a duty. Elevate people with runway, character, capacity, and compounding habits, rather than those addicted to taking without returning value. Because sponsorship is an investment, not charity, and investments require a thesis. Pour effort into allies who demonstrate signal over noise, those who execute, communicate, and carry challenges without drama. Reinforce with specific feedback, keep score of contributions, and build shared rituals that reward standards rather than personalities. When missteps occur, address root causes privately, separate behavior from identity, and convert the moment into a practical next step so learning sticks. Humiliation in public breeds resistance and silent opposition, while private calibration creates future guardians of the mission. Calibrate praise generously where it is earned, and let credit travel ahead of the work so momentum gathers in the right direction. Nothing proliferates like a well-placed thank you with details that prove attentiveness. Be known as the person who surfaces potential and then equips it with runway. Over time, a coalition forms that gladly reinforces success because its own fortunes and pride are braided into the same rope. The quiet consequence of this practice is protection. Those who were elevated rise into positions where their voice guards the one who invested in them, creating a lattice of support strong enough to withstand turbulence. Momentum is gravity disguised as psychology, and humans are pulled by it as surely as tides follow moons. Winning trajectories attract participation, while losing trajectories repel discretionary effort and encourage distance. A practical path to inevitability begins with small, certain wins, tight commitments delivered cleanly and on time, because reliability is the first proof that bolder claims are not fantasy. Track improvements visibly, numbers that move, cycles that shrink, failures that decline, customers that convert, teammates that onboard faster, and processes that shed friction. Progress charts the story in a way claims cannot. Speak in the language of commitment, not if but when, not maybe but by, and back that language with staged milestones whose achievement can be witnessed and counted. Preparation should be observable. New tools acquired, skills sharpened, checklists run, pilots launched. Preparation signals seriousness and reduces perceived risk for those contemplating joining the effort. Challenges need not be hidden. Label them as the next boss level in a game already being mastered. Define the constraint, sequence the attempt, and fold the lesson learned into the next iteration so the narrative remains coherent and forward-moving. When people conclude that success is on rails, hands reach in to help push the car. Contributions surface that were previously withheld, and resources unlock that were once guarded for safer bets. Yet none of this theater matters if delivery is theater too. Counterfeit inevitability collapses when promises missed become a pattern, and the cost is not only lost trust but reputational debt that accrues compound interest. Guard commitments jealously, trim overreach, and negotiate timelines that can be honored. It is better to build a staircase of proofs than to sell an elevator that never arrives. Report progress with clarity. What changed, what did not, what was learned, and use that clarity to sharpen the next cycle. Transparency strengthens credibility in both victory and stall. Invite verification, demos, audits, testimonials, even stress tests that would unmask pretenders. Those who are building something real are not endangered by inspection. The aim is a self-fulfilling dynamic where belief fuels action and action sustains belief. An engine in which each forward turn makes the next turn easier to achieve. Over time, what began as careful curation of signals becomes actual force, and that force is what converts onlookers into contributors and skeptics into participants, not because of slogans but because of receipts. Independence is excellent for self-reliance but inadequate for influence at scale. Leverage emerges when others succeed more easily because of a single presence, and the result is dependency that confers bargaining power without coercion. The task is to position oneself at the junction of value and rarity, skills that matter, maintained at high standard, which most would rather rent than learn. Become the person who unknots problems others avoid, the debugger of complex systems, the closer who rescues stalled negotiations, the translator who aligns technical and commercial dialects, the operator who resolves failure modes that cause reputational harm. Own or orchestrate access to critical resources, information repositories, scheduling gateways, vendor relationships, specialized workflows, financial levers, so that others do not merely appreciate contributions, but truly require them for their own commitments. Build a mental map of who needs what, why it matters, when the need recurs, and what constraints bind the solution. Then show up with answers faster than anyone expected, repeatedly. As patterns cement, status shifts, the enterprise, community, or team calibrates plans to the capacity and calendars of the person at the hub. Because work moves more smoothly when the hub engages. Real power also requires optionality. Being indispensable to many while dependent on none protects freedom of movement and decision quality. Diversify by cultivating multiple streams of income, varied client portfolios, cross-functional capabilities, and redundant suppliers so that no single entity can hold the project or livelihood hostage. Similarly, distribute goodwill across networks, industry peers, operators, specialists, financiers, mentors, so that when a door shuts, 3 more can open without delay. Frame helpfulness as a choice rather than an obligation by setting clear boundaries for when and how work is taken on, and by pricing attention according to the difficulty and stakes of the request. People respect the scarce resource that still shows up on time. Make a practice of documenting playbooks, standard operating procedures, and decision trees, so help can scale beyond personal bandwidth. Being at the center does not mean being the bottleneck. The paradox resolves like this. Dependence elevates influence, while optionality preserves autonomy, and the combination yields sustainable leverage. Practical examples matter. One might become the technology whisperer who recovers failing systems before dawn, the event architect who transforms chaos into rhythm, the revenue mechanic who rehabilitates broken funnels with diagnostic rigor, or the counsel who distills risk into decisions executives can sign without insomnia. Curate a varied Rolodex: legal, logistics, design, data, compliance, manufacturing, policy, so cross-boundary introductions can be made with surgical timing. Nothing travels faster than gratitude for the connector who shortened a year-long search to a single Tuesday call. Select rare knowledge that the market values but finds tedious to learn: regulatory nuance, complex integrations, high-stakes negotiation frameworks, and master it to the point of graceful speed. Protect the craft from exploitation with service-level expectations, clear scopes, and the right to say no. Desire to be valued must never morph into perpetual rescue duty. The aim is straightforward: be the person whose involvement upgrades the probability of success, not because of mystique, but because outcomes insist on it. Reality is not merely recorded. It is framed, titled, and narrated, and the frame alters behavior before action begins. Those who abdicate framing surrender the steering wheel to others. Those who seize it can guide attention toward the levers that matter and away from distractions that drain energy. This is not license to deceive. It is recognition that meaning is constructed and that language is a tool for focusing collective perception. Labeling the same circumstance as a crucible rather than a crisis changes posture. A crucible demands courage, learning, and narrow focus, while a crisis invites panic and blame. Normalize innovation by behaving as though a better approach is the obvious approach. Act with composed conviction, demonstrate small proofs quickly, and let the proof, not apology, clear the space for adoption. Words shape feeling, feeling shapes choice, and choice shapes outcome. Pick vocabulary that evokes agency, progress, and shared stakes, and retire phrases that shrink horizons or outsource responsibility. Make future states vivid so teams can step into them. Draw a picture of what the world looks like after the change lands. Customers relieved, processes lighter, calendars freer, margins wiser, and anchor the picture with measurable guideposts. Shift norms gradually. Start by adjusting a small ritual, then a weekly process, then a quarterly cadence, building wins and muscle memory so that what was once audacious becomes routine. Replace permission-seeking with reversible trials. Deploy a low-risk experiment, measure honestly, and publish results. Success becomes its own argument, and even failure yields data that sharpens the next attempt. Replace statements of limitation with questions of design. What would it take? Who has solved a cousin problem? What can be borrowed and adapted? So possibility has room to breathe. The person who authors the narrative often authors the decision tree that follows, because choices feel natural when the story already aims in their direction. Legacy is the ultimate leverage, the strategy of outlasting the calendar by encoding principles, practices, and assets so that impact continues when the originator is absent. Begin by converting tacit knowledge into explicit systems. Write down the mental models that guide judgment. Publish the protocols that produce reliable outputs. Capture the patterns that separate good from great. Build institutions rather than cults of personality, teams that can act on values without waiting for instructions, councils that resolve conflicts by reference to standards rather than charisma, cadences that keep momentum even in leadership transitions. Mentor successors with the patience of a gardener. Start early. Hand them real responsibility. Let them make real mistakes within safe bounds, and ensure their victories belong to them, so confidence becomes native rather than borrowed. Invest in artifacts that travel, courses, libraries, tools, templates, checklists, open source components, so scale does not require presence. Tell stories that carry the code, origin tales, crisis recoveries, redefining decisions, and place them in rituals so the next generation learns identity by participating. Offsites, town halls, demos, retrospectives, onboardings that feel like initiation rather than paperwork. Design for redundancy. No single keeper of the keys, no single mind that can halt the orchestra by stepping away, no single vendor whose failure halts the line. Strength is anti-fragile when setbacks, substitutions, and surprises can be absorbed without losing the tune. Create external proof of work that continues to compound reputation, books, patents, public case studies, philanthropic footprints, so brand persists as a platform for others who share the mission. Teach the builders behind the builders, trainers, managers, editors, reviewers, so quality propagates at the edges where new work emerges. The measure of the immortality strategy is simple. Does the system still deliver excellence when the founder is on a mountain with no signal? Weave all the strands together, elevate others to multiply capability. Cultivate momentum so participation becomes the obvious choice. Construct a dependency web that grants leverage while preserving autonomy. Shape reality so decisions aim where they should. And encode the mission so time becomes a collaborator rather than a thief. Each practice amplifies the others. Credit freely given attracts allies who fuel progress. Progress attracts belief that widens the coalition. Coalition increases the number of people who rely on solutions. Reliance grants voice in the room where frames are chosen, and frames accelerate the culture that will outlive any single contributor. Ethics matter. Privacy protects dignity. Boundaries prevent exploitation. Honesty about risks preserves trust, and delivering on stated commitments is the spine that keeps the whole body upright. Lessons from hard-nosed statecraft translate best when tempered by respect. Power wielded with discipline and care builds orders that last, while shortcuts born of vanity collapse under scrutiny. Execution tactics keep the engine humming. Use public praise with specifics, what was done, why it mattered, and what standard it sets, and let that praise circulate widely to set a reference class for future work. Move quickly to redirect errors in private, separating intent from impact and asking for the next action in the same breath, because momentum hates pauses. Maintain scorecards for metrics that matter, share trend lines at regular intervals, and teach teams to love the curve rather than the single data point, since curves tell stories and stories mobilize. When introducing new frames, use examples from adjacent domains so unfamiliar moves feel intuitive by analogy. Then tighten the analogy into practice with a short test and a visible win. As the dependency web expands, schedule capacity ruthlessly, say no with alternatives, and maintain wait lists so demand can be served without burnout. Overservice today that destroys service tomorrow is disguised failure. Document decisions with enough context that a future reader can reconstruct the logic. This habit is the seed bank containing future harvests. Networks should be tended like gardens. Prune connections that siphon energy without reciprocity, water the relationships that nourish growth, and plant new seeds in unfamiliar soil where the next opportunity might sprout. Practice ask and offer discipline. Whenever requesting help, bring a specific offer in parallel, an introduction, a resource, a review, because reciprocal loops spin faster than one-way requests. Protect reputation with boring consistency. Arrive on time, deliver on promises, correct mistakes proactively, and stay calm under stress, because calm is contagious and panic is corrosive. When shaping inevitability, resist the dopamine rush of loud announcements. Prefer a steady drumbeat that proves rather than declares, and escalate claims only after evidence can carry them. Hold a weekly moment for the legacy lens. What was taught, what was codified, what became easier for those who come next, and what remains opaque that must be made legible. This lens ensures that today's flame becomes a torch, not a flare. Consider the human element always at the center. Pride, fear, belonging, aspiration, and fairness. Elevation speaks to pride. Momentum calms fear. Dependency offers belonging. Framing awakens aspiration. And consistent standards deliver fairness. Leaders who understand these currents swim faster and tire less because they ride with the river's flow rather than against it. Avoid the trap of domination masquerading as strength. True strength grants others room to grow and insists on the conditions that make growth likely. Clear goals, real feedback, meaningful stakes, and room to try again after a stumble. Practice strategic patience. Allow compounding to do the heavy lifting and stop changing the plan at the first sign of weather. Choose arenas where strengths matter and weaknesses can be contained. Design teams so complements cover gaps rather than duplicating the same competence in every chair. Above all, let results do the arguing. In the end, durable influence is architecture, beams of recognition that hold others up, trusses of proof that carry momentum across spans, joints of dependency that connect efforts into a structure, walls of narrative that shape how occupants move through the space, and foundations of legacy that keep the building upright when the storm hits. Construct with intention and humility, perform maintenance on schedule, and budget for reinforcements before cracks appear. The point is not to be the loudest voice, but to be the force that makes better outcomes easier, more likely, and more frequent again and again. When that is true, others will line up to contribute, follow through on commitments, and protect the shared house because their own room sits inside it. That is what real power feels like, not a clenched fist, but an open hand that people choose to grasp, because doing so makes their world stronger too. The dividing line between flash-in-the-pan charisma and power that outlives its owner is simple. Build mechanisms that keep working when presence is absent, that carry a signature through other people's hands, and that turn personal insight into public infrastructure. Most chase status, being consulted, being needed, being praised, and that glow fades the moment the door closes. Durable authority begins when methods, institutions, and narratives are strong enough to move without constant supervision. A Florentine strategist once argued that affection and dread rarely coexist, and that caution favors the latter. But here's the upgrade. Being remembered outruns both. Fear dissipates and affection cools. Processes, doctrines, and well-designed models persist, adapt, and replicate. Design repeatable ways to solve recurring problems, frameworks, checklists, and decision trees, so that each reuse extends the originator's reach. When others deploy a method, influence is licensing itself into new contexts, refracting through fresh minds and unfamiliar arenas. Ideas placed in the mental toolboxes of students, colleagues, and communities continue to operate autonomously. Every time a lesson is taught onward, the circuit completes again. Externalize hard-won understanding into artifacts, field notes refined into playbooks, war stories distilled into SOPs, mental models drawn into diagrams, because knowledge that never leaves a skull vanishes on a timetable, while knowledge that is codified outlives schedules and setbacks. Found communities, coalitions, and teams that embody guiding principles so completely that behavior remains consistent even as faces change. Coherent cultures with clear rituals and shared language regularly outlast founders by generations. Aim a percentage of effort at the amplifiers, the mentors, managers, educators, editors, curators, and conveners who influence circles larger than their own. Because a single spark placed in a lighthouse throws light farther than 10 handheld candles. Solve a category of problem once and then package the solution so others can reproduce it without guesswork. Templatize the steps. Define triggers and thresholds. Specify inputs and outputs. And note the failure modes. Don't just win. Construct a path others can walk and a map they can carry. Every time another person succeeds by following that trail, two outcomes converge. Impact multiplies, and allegiance to the originating logic strengthens into a legacy with backers who benefit directly from its survival. If a novel way to handle a common breakdown is discovered, write it down, annotate it with examples, add a troubleshooting sidebar, and teach it to 15 people. Soon dozens are better at that task, and the name attached to the method becomes shorthand for clarity under pressure. If an approach yields exceptional outcomes, abstract the pattern into a canonical framework with stages, checkpoints, and exemplars. Now the thinking can cross borders and seep into teams that will never meet in person. Translate life lessons into transferable guidance in writing, audio, or video, so others can adapt and apply them in unfamiliar domains. The people whose names thread history are not recalled solely for personal feats. The ones etched deeply built structures, systems, doctrines, and organizations that kept accomplishing long after the original architect exited. Think beyond individual wins. Construct something that survives critique, turnover, and time. By now, 9 psychological instruments sit on the workbench, the same families of tools long used by consequential operators. Similarity leveraged into rapport, scarcity calibrated into value, emotion harnessed before logic, information managed with altitude, status traded upward by elevating others, momentum sculpted into inevitability, dependency woven into leverage with optionality preserved, perception framed into reality, and legacy engineered through systems. What separates collectors of ideas from practitioners is not another note, but contact with the field. Minutes on the clock, experiments run, reflections documented, iterations shipped. Knowledge unspent is a spectacle, not a strategy. 2 roads begin where this paragraph ends. On the first, the tab gets closed. A tiny burst of satisfaction registers for having learned something stimulating, and tomorrow looks identical to yesterday. Patterns hold influence remains an external weather system to endure, and someone else continues to define the terms. On the second, a single tactic is chosen and used within 24 hours. No delay, no elaborate ceremony. So the loop closes, feedback arrives, and momentum has something to push against. Most will select the soft path of intention without action, perhaps even share a clip and call it progress, and then wonder why the needle never moves while hands remain off the dial. Refuse that drift. Pick what resonated, the reflection gambit that mirrors cadence and vocabulary to lower the drawbridge, the rarity signal that restores the price of attention, or the legacy move that packages know-how into durable systems and apply it once before the day ends. Run a bounded test. Observe, adjust, repeat. Principles earn loyalty by delivering outcomes, and these have been delivering for centuries. The open variable is commitment. One more line in the sand was issued earlier. And it wasn't decorative. I choose power over being liked. Rendered plainly, it prioritizes effectiveness ahead of approval, respect ahead of appeasement, traction ahead of applause. Most spend entire lives chasing universal likability, filing away sharp edges until no distinct outline remains, and end up pleasant, compliant, and forgettable. The people who bend arcs choose a different profile. They prize being taken seriously over being broadly palatable, outcomes over optics, and lasting imprint over short-term comfort. For the next month, choose deliberately. Select one strategy from the 9. Apply it consistently, not sporadically. Track what happens as if running a lab. Times used, contexts, responses, results. Notice the tonal shift in rooms, the way interruptions drop when presence is scarce and focused, the speed at which decisions arrive when frames are tight and practical, the invitations that appear when others realize problems end faster in this company. Measure influence the way a builder measures load-bearing capacity, by what it can hold, by how it redistributes weight, by how it performs under stress. Return to this moment in 30 days and write the before and after in a notebook. What changed? What held steady? What compound effects began to show up? Something will change because these are not cute slogans. They're patterns of human behavior that function like gravity. Half a millennium ago, a civil servant in Renaissance Italy wrote frankly about how authority really operates, how appearances shape conclusions, how courage and cunning must take turns steering, how incentives pull harder than rhetoric. Those who understand the flows of attention, fear, hope, belonging, and status tend to set agendas. Those who don't tend to live inside agendas set by others. The comprehension is now present. The fork in the road is visible. One path uses this understanding to construct assets, systems that make good outcomes normal, institutions that carry values, and practices that turn chaos into choreography. Another path lets insight sit in the mind like a valuable tool left in its packaging. Will this knowledge become a framework deployed to raise standards and throughput for everyone within reach? Will it become a gift that helps others while lifting the giver, binding goodwill to performance? Will it be put to work to repair broken processes, resolve long-standing bottlenecks, and elevate the rooms where decisions are made? Or will it be shelved while habitual loops run unchallenged and the future looks suspiciously like the past? Remember this paradox. Refusing to practice influence does not neutralize it. The decision simply outsources control to louder voices and stronger frames. If this exploration clarified how power really flows, take the practical steps that keep the learning alive. Subscribe to the cadence that keeps the conversation moving. Set alerts so the next blueprint lands where it can be used, and pass this along to someone ready to stop playing defense against other people's games and start operating at altitude. Invoke the affirmation again. Type verbatim somewhere that matters. Choose authority over approval. Then make it real by doing what can be counted. Draw up one process map from a recurring success so the team can replicate it. Draft a framing memo for a decision meeting that names stakes, constraints, and criteria in plain language, and circulate it in advance so the room starts aligned. Build a small ambassador circle of colleagues who will test a method together for 2 weeks and compare notes. Capture a corrective plan for a recent failure with the exact steps that would have prevented it, and turn that into a checklist others can run. Create a teaching artifact, a one-pager, a 5-minute video, or a short deck, that distills a skill and give it to 3 people who can use it immediately. These are system seeds, and they germinate quickly when planted in problems people already care about. Structure the legacy work with the same rigor used for delivery work. Version playbooks like software, V1 is the first draft. V1.1 patches the obvious holes. V2 arrives after a field trial. Changelogs show what evolved. Attach metrics to frameworks. If a hiring rubric is codified, define what improvements would verify its value. Cycle time cut by 20%. Regret rate halved. Performance ramp faster by 1 month, and inspect monthly. Build community architecture. A regular forum with a purpose. A code of conduct that encodes values. A rotating facilitation model that prevents bottlenecks. And a repository where knowledge accumulates rather than scattering. Design governance that protects standards without strangling initiative. Who decides what? What evidence is needed? How exceptions are handled? How feedback becomes revision? Seed a mentorship tree. Teach 3 people to teach 3 more with starter kits, slides, scripts, exercises, so quality stays consistent as the circle widens. Where legal and ethical, open-source parts of the method so adoption can spread farther than any single organization. Where proprietary is necessary, license wisely so stewardship and sustainability coexist. Fold the other levers back into this last move. Use the reflection gambit when teaching. Match pace and vocabulary so students feel seen, then lead them into new complexity 1 notch at a time. Calibrate rarity by offering deep attention in set windows so that participation stays focused and valuable. Scarcity signals respect for everyone's time. Lead with emotion. Paint the frustration the system will remove, the relief it will deliver, and the pride it will produce. Then show the logic. Maintain informational altitude. Share enough to empower, keep sensitive pieces compartmentalized, and choose moments for releases that maximize adoption rather than noise. Raise others as the system scales. Attribute ideas, showcase contributors, and let credit circulate visibly so the coalition invests in maintaining what works. Shape perception by naming reality with the words that recruit effort. We're building a reliability machine, not we're patching holes again. And then lock those words into rituals. Like a weekly stand-up that celebrates specific moves aligned with the story. Build leverage that does not trap the builder. Make the system not depend on one person by design. Appoint deputies, write down the keys, and store them in a place with access controls and accountability. Create redundancy so holidays and emergencies don't stall critical flows. Integrate exit ramps, how someone hands off a role, how a framework retires, how a policy sunsets, so evolution is smoother than rupture. Keep the boundary between helpfulness and obligation bright. Publish service levels and office hours to preserve capacity. Give the method a name and a clear scope. Named things travel farther and are easier to talk about. Close the loop with evidence. Showcase before and after snapshots, testimonials from the edges, and a handful of raw dashboards that show trend lines. Let proof do the persuasion heavy lifting while voice stays steady and calm. When the dust settles, real power feels less like a clenched jaw and more like a reliable current. The current that others plug into because their work runs better on it. It is the hum of a system that keeps its promises, the clarity of a narrative that organizes action, the loyalty of allies who were raised and respected, the weight of momentum that invites more hands to the rope, and the quiet confidence of legacy artifacts doing their job while their author sleeps. Post the commitment where it can be seen, favor respect over approval, outcomes over optics, memory over comfort. Then take the one step that puts gravity on the right side of the project. Step 2 follows, then step 3, and soon the staircase exists for others to climb without guidance. That's the point, building so well that help is still present when the voice is not. The door to actual authority stands open. Step through. Welcome to power that lasts.